Good morning, everybody, and welcome. We're really excited to have you here this morning to talk about all things new in ArcGIS Enterprise. So we're really going to span the gamut this morning, so we're going to try to cover a little bit of everything. But of course, if you have any questions, visit us at the showcase. There's a lot that is coming in the 10.7 release at the end of the month. So my name is Hillary, and this is my colleague Scott. We are on the product and engineering teams for Enterprise. And I kind of wanted to start this session off a little bit different, but similar if you've been to any of our plenaries. Jack has everybody kind of chat with somebody next to them. So just introduce yourself and maybe give the person next to you a little bit of information about what you do with Enterprise. I know it's a little bit unconventional, but I wanted to get the energy going in here. So you don't have to stand, but maybe introduce yourself to somebody that you don't know.
This hard.
All right. I hate to interrupt this because this is like the best scene for me. People talking about Enterprise. All right. Thank you. Thank you for participating in that. Jump back one.
Oh, sure.
So we want to get to know you a little bit more too. I think we want to continue to tailor these sessions because Enterprise is so broad. It has such a big footprint. And to make sure that we're covering things that you're interested in. So by a show of hands, who is primarily responsible for mapping and analysis? So maybe traditional GIS analysis, GIS manager. If you raise your hand for everything, that's also okay. Developers, coding and development, maybe you're doing app. Okay, that's what I would expect at Dev Summit. Content and user administration. So specifically portal, but also maybe some server administration. And then strictly on the IT side, I think everybody does everything here. That's awesome. Great. So we are going to cover today 4 different areas. So we're going to touch on bread and butter, so mapping and analysis. We have some new tools in the Enterprise portal, some mapping styles that we want to introduce to you. We're also going to cover a lot of new improvements to server administration, also on the portal side as well. You may have heard of some new opportunities for publishing and data management, so we'll cover that too. And then we have a lot of new applications and products that will actually be bundled with Enterprise at 10.7. So who heard of Notebook Server at the plenary? Yeah, are you guys excited about that? It's going to be good. So we wanted to touch on some of those new products that maybe aren't core Enterprise, but things that you can still take advantage of by using the product. So I'm primarily going to be focusing on 10.7. So 10.7 is going to be coming out in just a couple of weeks. If you do upgrade on the dot releases, that's perfectly fine. Everything that we covered today, you'll also get in the 10.7.1 release this summer. We spent a majority of last year's sessions talking about 10.6 and 10.6.1, so we won't be covering too much of that, but if you're interested in that as well, our last sessions will cover that. So again, we're going to focus on the March release. It's jam-packed with new tools and features, so we're excited to share those with you. So I'm actually going to turn it over to Scott. We wanted to just do a really quick lay of the land and quick introduction of Enterprise. Does anybody in here not have Enterprise, is completely unfamiliar with the product? Okay.
Wow, good.
Awesome. We're in good company. Okay, so I'll turn it over to Scott.
So despite that, though, I would expect that none of your enterprise systems, no 2 of your systems look the exact same. We've gone from having an enterprise that's primarily a server-based publishing services, hosting services, to a complete system where you're hosting web maps and apps, you're doing things in your WebGIS, you're doing all sorts of other cool things tying into the portal. And ArcGIS Enterprise has really become the central hub for what Jack was calling the Esri geospatial cloud. What you just know as your entire system is kind of centered around enterprise. And we've tried to make it as flexible as possible to fit the kind of infrastructure that you have. If you want to use physical infrastructure, bare metal, if you want to use virtual, if you want to use cloud, we've tried to make it as easy for you as possible to have that flexibility in how you deploy your system and what it looks like. People are doing all sorts of things with ArcGIS Enterprise. Like I said, you're not just publishing services, you're collaborating with other portals. You're working with your field workers and empowering field and office apps. You're using Enterprise to analyze big data in your WebGIS. You're creating machine learning, and hopefully later this year you'll continue to use machine learning and data science with the new Python notebooks. You're working with huge sets of imagery. And so we see our customers using all sorts of different cool things in enterprise. The challenge for us as the development team is to tailor each release so that there's something new in each release that makes the product measurably better for every enterprise user, no matter what your enterprise looks like. So let's take a look at what's new in 10.7. We'll start with mapping and analysis.
Sounds good. All right, so we wanted to start with a new smart mapping style. I think this was touched on a little bit at Plenary. It's also in ArcGIS Online, but this is a really exciting way to be able to understand how variables are related across your data set. So if you have two different attributes and you maybe don't want to do analysis on it to figure out what the relationship is between those, you can actually use this out-of-the-box smart mapping style to figure that out for you. So I have a particular interest in urban planning, so these use cases are kind of tailored towards that, but it would be a good way to figure out, if you are a real estate organization, which commercial buildings have high occupancy rates and high energy use. Or maybe kind of the inverse, so they have low occupancy rates, but a lot of energy use. So instead of having to query or do some analysis, you can just use this mapping style to figure out the relationship between the two. So I kind of think about it as the prevalence of this and the prevalence of that, and what are all of the gradients in between. So here's a really good example of a relationship style that one of our cartographers put together, Lisa Berry. So this is showing the path of a hurricane, and you can actually see across that track that those attributes are changing. So in the lower right hand, you can see that there's low speed and low pressure. So at this point, the hurricane is maybe relatively new and it's not quite powerful yet. But once we get into the middle of the ocean, you can see there's high speed and low pressure, which is actually when a hurricane is most disastrous. So just by applying this smart mapping style, it compares those attributes and just gives you the visualization that you need without having to figure out how to relate those. So I just wanted to show you, if we can flip over to my laptop. Do you guys see a map? I can't even see it. Okay, good. So this is how you can actually use the relationship style. So if you see on the bottom in my attribute table for this data set, this is buildings in Chicago. So it's that first use case where I have the square footage of buildings and the energy use. And I just want to look at this data set and figure out, are large buildings using a lot of energy? Are small buildings using a lot of energy? I have the electricity use for the entire year and the gross floor area. And so I simply go into the map and select smart mapping. And this relationship style, I've selected the two attributes that I want to compare. So that's the size of the building and the energy use. And you can see that that table actually changes for me and will actually change the symbology of those different points so that the darker brown points and clusters mean that they're large buildings with high energy use. But then it's also interesting because there are small buildings with high energy use on the west side of the city. So this is completely out of the box. I was setting this up with a friend yesterday and it took 30 seconds. And I immediately was able to understand my data way more clearly than I would be just looking at the data point. So we're really excited that this is going to be available for you all in 10.7. So kind of going along the mapping side of things, we're also introducing the ability to create offline map areas. So this is particularly helpful if you have field workers that are needing to collect data in the field and maybe their device is offline. So during the plenary, we talked about the pre-planned map areas and the dynamic map areas. So this is an example of pre-planning your map areas. So here I've got that same data set. It's just a web map. I've actually created a specific area that will be able to be taken offline, and I can create 16 map areas if I want. And it just makes it faster to download to a device and to use that when you're offline in the field. So you can use this in applications like Collector, or if you build your own custom applications. And it should be really helpful for you to be able to just create those areas so that your field workers have an easier access to your data. And you can actually do this directly in the web map under the Settings tab. If you scroll all the way down, there's a new section called Map Areas, and that's where you can start creating those different areas for your workers. I also wanted to talk a little bit about GeoAnalytics Server. So it was really exciting to see the bus demo at the plenary. This is really the aspect of ArcGIS Enterprise that allows you to do big data processing and management. So it's a server role very similar to GeoEvent or Image Server. And at 10.7, we have a few new tools available specifically for data management. So the ability to clip your data to an area of interest, dissolve boundaries, merge data sets, and we're also kind of foraying into statistical analysis as well. So we have Random Forest, which has now been optimized for these really large data sets, and regression tools. So what's really exciting about this release is we're finally introducing an extensibility aspect of GeoAnalytics Server. So if you use Spark in particular and or Python, I think that this will be really interesting for you. This is the ability to run custom Python code. So any sub-packages that are part of PySpark against your GeoAnalytics server. So you can actually use that power of Spark to distribute your analysis so that you can get very, very fast processing. It's also exciting because you can just simply run SQL queries against your data, which is really great. And then lastly, one other thing that we're introducing with GeoAnalytics, which has been very much requested, is the ability to write your analysis results back to your input data stores. So with GeoAnalytics, you can connect to HDFS or cloud stores, or you can have a bunch of shape files in a folder. So now you can actually do the analysis against your GeoAnalytics server, and all that data is written back to that input store. So you can write it back to Hadoop if you want to. So lots of new areas that we're expanding on in GeoAnalytics, so we're really excited about that as well.
Speaking of Python, the ArcGIS Notebook Server is going to be available for the first time in 10.7. As you saw, the hosted Python notebooks in the plenary, and if you were at FedGIS, you saw them as well. This is a really exciting project for us because it allows us to bring the Jupyter Notebook environment directly into the portal and have it directly integrated with the portal. The notebook server is installed in your infrastructure. It's a version of ArcGIS Server. There are additional steps that you take when installing it to also install Docker on your machine because it uses Docker containers to isolate each notebook author's workspace. They're going to be working in their own containerized operating system to be able to use their own resources without interfering with others. The installation does involve Docker, but it is walked through. We try to make it as easy as possible for you to set up and start using notebooks. Notebooks, you can, there are two flavors of hosted notebooks at 10.7. The first uses the Python API, as well as it comes bundled with a runtime with about 300 other Python libraries. You can also obtain the advanced license, which brings ArcPy into the notebook environment. And this is the first time that ArcPy has been available in the Jupyter Notebook experience. So we're very excited about the ability to do dynamic mapping, do the visualization, the on-the-fly stuff with ArcPy. As I said, Notebook Server is integrated with the portal. So you actually access it from the portal. Every notebook that you create has its own portal item, and it can be shared. Its security settings are identical to any other portal item, as you can share it with no one, with everyone, with certain groups. It has that flexibility because it's in the portal. When you're working in notebooks, you can add and you can reference portal items using the Add tab. And you can also add items from ArcGIS Online and from Living Atlas of the World, and those will just appear as code snippets in your cell. You can share directly from the portal. I also want to talk about the rich gallery that we have of sample notebooks at 10.7. When you install Notebook Server, you receive, at 10.7 there are 29 sample notebooks. Part of what I want to talk about this is that in the plenary you saw some really cool data science workflows. But we think that Python notebooks have a lot of potential as well for administration and content management, data wrangling. It isn't just about the really cool data science, advanced distributed processing stuff. It's also about the day-to-day workflows that you just want to automate and have the routine kind of administrative stuff. So the sample notebooks walk through, there's a lot of data science, forest-based regression, all kind of stuff. There's also a lot of just basic workflows for administration. To take a look at one of them, there's a content management where you can run this sample notebook to check for broken URLs in all of your web maps in the portal. It runs through everything and explains it all for you, so you and your notebook users can hopefully get a better sense of how to use notebooks for all these different types of workflows using these notebooks. Notebooks combine not just code, but you should be combining documentation and explaining what you're doing. We think notebooks are really good for transparency and reducibility. So we're really excited to have this available in 10.7. Next, we're going to talk about some stuff with administration. So the first thing I want to talk about is webhooks. This is coming into the portal in 10.7. You may be familiar with webhooks and other platforms. It is not in itself an email notification system or a message notification system, but it is a platform, it's a trigger action-based platform that you can use to set up with a third-party service to have any sort of messaging system, notification system, or some sort of trigger action reaction response. The basic structure of webhooks is here. An action occurs that you've set up the webhook to listen for. A webhook is actually just a REST endpoint in the portal sharing API. Every time that action occurs, the webhook posts a JSON description of that action into the webhook URL. It has all the relevant info about the action that occurred, when it occurred, who did it, so on and so forth. And then that's where you kick in your platform of choice. You can use if this then that, Zapier, Microsoft Flow. In the next slide, I'll show you a screenshot of Integromat being used. And these are all different third-party services that you can use to hook up to listen for that webhook, and every time the JSON payload is delivered, to kick in and do some sort of action. Of course, that can be an email, it can be posting in your Slack. You can do things like we saw in the plenary to use services like AWS Lambda and the Python API to fill in missing metadata every time a new item is posted. Being that these are third party, you can use smart home. I don't know, you could have Alexa tell you that the item was posted. You could do, turning on your lights. I don't know, there's all sorts of stuff that you could do with these webhooks. But there's a lot of power in the flexibility of being able to connect listening to the webhook to the next step that you configure it to do. So for an example webhook, we're using Integromat here. It's a very visual third-party service. On the left, I have a webhook set up to post in Slack. And the webhook Integromat has listened and determined the data structure of the JSON payload. It says, all right, the data structure is telling me when this occurred, who did it, what user was affected, what the operation was, and all these things. From that, I can construct a message to automatically write into my Slack saying, hello, this action occurred at blank time. This user did it. It affected this user. Log into the portal here if this was an error. And so there's a lot of flexibility in how you write these messages, even if you're just simply writing an email or a Slack. Expect to see the scope of webhooks expanded over time. We think that it has a lot of power and a lot of capabilities. At 10.7, there are 3 use cases for webhooks. You can have it listen to group actions, have it listen to item actions, or have it listen to user actions. For example, I can just have the webhook listen to /users, and that every time a user is added or updated or deleted, I would have that webhook post the payload. I could also have it listen to users /add, so it only posts the payload when a user is added. So yeah, we're very excited to have webhooks, and we think there's a lot of possibility in the future of webhooks. On the ArcGIS Server administration side, we have some new capabilities at 10.7 that are really going to empower administrators in your routine workflows. The first is called Request ID. You saw this a little bit in the plenary. Shreyas included in his demo. A request ID is attached to each administrative and publishing request and service request that comes through into ArcGIS Server. And through the lifecycle of that request, while it's being processed by the server, every log that's written will include that request ID. That means that when you're querying logs in the server, you can filter for the request ID and be able to get that comprehensive timeline of everything that happened in the lifecycle of the request. So you're going to be able to drill down into the logs and understand the complete picture and get more information out of the request history. The second, the second thing I want to talk about are these inactivity properties. These are based on a new thing that occurs every minute, particularly important for multi-machine server sites. It's called a heartbeat property. Every minute in the configuration store, each machine updates a property called last heartbeat. So it should just be constantly updating the timestamp every minute. When it's not updating the timestamp, it's assumed that the machine is inactive. And we can then use that for a couple of properties to deal with that machine and prevent it from receiving administrative and publishing requests that would otherwise go unmet. So the first property is called machine suspend threshold. By default, it is now set to 60 minutes. And so after 60 minutes of a machine being inactive, that machine will be suspended, meaning that it will no longer receive the administrative or any publishing requests. There's also a second optional property that's disabled by default called the disabled machine on register threshold. After a certain amount of time of no activity on the heartbeat property, you can configure this property to unregister a machine automatically. This is going to have the most relevance for large machine cloud deployments. When you're working with many machines in the cloud, you don't particularly care about any single machine, but you want to make sure that there are no inactive machines dragging the whole system down. You can configure this unregister threshold to automatically take out the machine from your cloud deployment. So again, that is not enabled by default, but you can set it up using the system properties in the ArcGIS Server Administrator directory. The last property I want to talk about for server is the jobs page. At 10.6.1, we introduced a REST API set of tools to query and monitor and intervene in current geoprocessing jobs that are running in your site. So particularly important if you have a job that is hanging, if you have a lot of jobs that are piling up in the queue, you're able to query these jobs, understand what's happening with them, and then intervene to cancel a specific job or to clear your whole queue of jobs. At 10.7, that is now going to be available in the ArcGIS Server Manager application through the Sites tab. So you can drill down by service, you can query by a specific type of job, whether it's executing or whether it's waiting to be executed and all that stuff. And then you can actually intervene, canceling jobs, clearing the cache, and pausing jobs that are running directly from ArcGIS Server Manager. Next, I want to move on to something that I have a lot of enthusiasm for. I hope I can transmit that enthusiasm. It's called the Shared Instance Pool. So those of you who work with servers know that the work of ArcGIS Server is done by ArcSoc processes running on your machine. And each machine in an ArcGIS Server site runs an ArcSoc, which we can just call a SOC. For each process that's running, there will be at least one SOC. And each time that a query comes in to draw a map or to fly to an address, the SOC takes that query, it processes it, and then it sends it back to the client. Now, a SOC can only process one request at a time. So when you have multiple that are coming in, you will receive a performance delay if you have simultaneous requests that are waiting to be processed by that SOC. For that reason, we have dedicated instance pools, and this has always been the architecture where you can scale up the min and the max settings of a specific pool of services for the service. So you can say, I want the service to have at min 1 and to have at max to have 4 processes, and depending on the amount of traffic that the service is receiving, you'll have anywhere between 1 and 4. Now, all of these service instances are expensive. They do take up memory, they take up RAM. When you have a lot of services, that can end up causing a performance impact on your machine, causing a memory usage problem. For that reason, it's a good goal for administrators to optimize the number of service instances that you have running on your machine so that you are only using as many as you need, that you're meeting that traffic and you're not causing any performance delays from the lack of processes, but you're also providing, you're also cutting down so that the processes are not running unused in your site. Now, often, if you have 50 to 100 services, it's probably the case that some of those services are receiving constant traffic. They need multiple SOCs at any given time. Meanwhile, you have a lot of services that are sitting there not receiving any traffic. If they have ArcSOCs running, that can cause, that can really eat up your memory. For that reason, we've introduced the shared instance pool at 10.7. This is an optional capability that's configured through ArcGIS Server Manager. It is a pool of ArcSOCs that are not tied to any given service, but you can configure compatible map services. Any map service and any feature service from ArcGIS Pro can use this shared instance pool and to dip in whenever they need a service request and to dip out. There will be no cold start drawback. It works immediately because those SOCs are already running in the site and are just ready to be used. This allows you to conserve that memory without having a performance impact and to reach that goal of optimizing the services. And for those services that the shared instances model works better, you can configure those while still isolating your high volume, high traffic services in their dedicated instance pools to continue to have, especially if you have something like a service level agreement on the service, it needs to be running at all times. It needs to constantly have, to be able to meet every need. You can continue to have that while also relegating the lesser used services to the shared instance pool. This also means that you have less administrative overhead time spent tinkering with your different services. You're simply able to put it into the shared instance pool and forget about it. So we're really excited about this. Expect to see the scope of the shared instance pool expanded over time to more types of services and to have a greater scope over time. Am I next? I'm still talking. The next thing I want to talk about is data and publishing. We have some cool things that I'm sure a lot of you will be excited about. The biggest ask that we've received since Pro came out was to have the ability to publish from a standalone, or publish from ArcGIS Pro to a standalone server. That is now possible at 2.3 through the ArcPy sharing module. You're going to be able to create a service draft, and then you can publish it to server. You specify that it's a standalone server type during the ArcPy script. The ArcGIS Pro documentation walks you through this. It's already available now, so you can use it even without having ArcGIS Server 10.7, as long as you have ArcGIS Pro 2.3. We are planning on having a GUI for this. It will be in the user interface, hopefully in Pro 2.4 or later in 2019. The next thing is the ability to publish OGC services from ArcGIS Pro. Now when you're sharing a web layer from Pro, you can specify the additional layers of WMS and WFS to be published along with that web layer, or you can also have the capabilities of WCS and the Keel markup language, the KML, to be capabilities of the web layer. This is really important for a lot of our users who have open data needs, especially government customers, so we're happy to deliver that to you. Hillary?
Great, thanks, Scott. All Are you guys excited about the shared instances? I think that that's going to help a lot.
If you're not excited now, you will be soon.
Our other products manager, Phil Petey, it's his favorite thing. So I wanted to talk about hosted feature layers a little bit. We have some new enhancements for feature layers that are hosted in your enterprise portal. So views is not new, but it is something that we're continuing to expand upon at every release. So at 10.6 and 10.6.1, if you wanted to create kind of a subset of your data in a new layer, maybe you needed to apply a field definition or a feature definition to only show certain attributes in your data to share that with others, but you still want to maintain that relationship with the source, we had that ability. Now at 10.7, we are exposing the ability to define an area of interest. So this box here will probably look very similar to the one that I showed you for the offline map areas, but basically you can draw a certain geographic area of interest and it will remove all of the data, actually rather it hides all of the data not in that specific area, so that when you share that view with others, they only get the data that's part of that view. But if I'm editing that source layer, any changes there are going to be synchronized with that view so that everything's kept in sync. So the use case for this is really being able to share maybe a specific geographic area with analysts that you're working with, rather than showing them everything in the layer. So if you're working on the entire state, but you know that some analysts have interest in just certain cities, you could create a feature layer view that would allow you to define those certain areas so that they only get the data that they need. Wow.
Exciting.
I love this applause. Making data fun. So another thing that we're introducing is domains. So this has been a long-term feature in enterprise geodatabases, and though we don't necessarily always have parity between hosted layers and federated layers, as in layers from an enterprise geodatabase, we're constantly trying to make improvements to hosted layers so that they're really usable and helpful for you. So domains are a way to constrain attribute values for a certain field. So you can actually use these values in different applications, whether you're editing a web map or you're actually collecting data against that layer using collector. And what it really does is enforces data integrity and consistency so that people aren't out in the field collecting all kinds of crazy values, and then you have to go and do a really prolonged QA, QC action on those. So an example here in this map, I have City of Chicago data. You'll notice a theme. I'm from there. But this is only for certain wards. So I don't want people entering ward 100 or 50 or something. I just want them to enter in 1 through 5. So I have a domain on that value, and they only see the pick list of those values that I've actually prescribed. So I wanted to just show you how you can use domains. Maybe we can flip back over to my laptop here. I can't see. Do you see a table? Okay, good. So this is a data set of service requests in Washington, D.C. And if I'm having people add new values or editing this data, I only want them to select a certain range of service types. So here you can see I've got a field service type, and I've actually created a domain here, so the drop-down only has things like sidewalk repair, trash collection, things like that. I want people to maintain the data in a way that I want, so I want them to only be able to select these certain values. So to actually create domains within the portal, if you go to your layer and then click on the Data tab, then go to Fields, and you'll actually select the field that you want to apply the domain, and then scroll all the way down. So here, this is my list of domains. I can change that, and I get this whole pop-up for both what is the label in the map, and then what is the code on the underlying database that it's stored in. So I think this will be really helpful, whether you're doing web mapping or field data collection. You can see here if I try to edit a feature, it's actually only going to give me that drop down for the domains that I've applied there. And this can be dynamic, so you can change this. If you change it to domains that you didn't have existing, it won't break anything. So you can continue to update those as you need. So we're excited that this kind of gives a little bit additional level of granularity and data integrity. So I'm going to pass it over to Scott to talk about print service.
Printing. How many of you guys use printing regularly? Cool, yeah. At 10.6, we revamped the print service engine for the new generation of GIS. This is part of the printing tool service that comes with the portal, but also any custom print service that is printed from ArcGIS Pro uses this new print engine. And it's optimized for web map viewing. Layers are preserved in these printed maps as geometries. When you're using when you export to PDF, for example, the text is preserved as the type text. That allows you to have a lot higher resolution. As you see in this example map, you can really, even when you zoom in far, you're able to see a very clear picture and that text never becomes blurry. You can now include vector tile layers in print services and print them using printing widgets such as in the ArcGIS API for JavaScript. And the new print service supports all Unicode characters natively. So if you're using non-English, I suppose if you're printing emoji, you could have that be natively printed using the Unicode character in the print service. That also opens up a very cool new Pro, ArcPy, and Server workflow. The custom print service using ArcPy. You're able to create your own map templates, your custom map templates, and then you can adapt the ArcPy script for the export web map, which is the core of the printing operation, is exporting a web map. You can adapt that export script to include your custom template, to export your custom template or a folder of your custom templates. When you run your adapted script as a geoprocessing tool in Pro, you can share the result of that as a geoprocessing package. Within that package will be a custom print service that you can use in your JavaScript, your web app builder, and from printing from the server to print out and have the ability to choose those templates in your web apps. At 10.7, we now have the ability to extend that a little more with the addition of ArcGIS Pro reports. Reports combine maps with tabular and graphical data that dynamically describe what's in those maps. They're intended to be reproducible, they're printable, professional quality, and the ability now for Pro with this workflow is to include reports into that print service. So let me show you what I mean. We have Pro. I've been authoring this report. And I have dynamic elements and I have static elements in this report. There's a map, and the map should be updated regularly to include, I have a layer in there that's describing the aquatic species that are endangered or extirpated in those waterways of Canada. On the bottom part of the slide, you can see the table that will update as I select a certain part of that map. What I do next is I author an ArcPy tool script. I adapted that export web map script to export the certain number of templates and to export that report. When I do that, I'm able to package it and specify the report that I want as part of the ArcPy script. When I run that, this print and report script in Pro, and I specify a certain number of parameters, I then can run the result of that. I can share it as a geoprocessing package. What I'm able to do then is to go into the web map itself. And when what I've done is I've configured the print widget of my web map or my web app to use this printing service. Eventually, it's going to load. Let me show you what I
Wi-Fi.
Yeah, conference Wi-Fi. So I have my print service. At some point, it will load. What's the password? I blanked for a second. Oh yeah, you don't have one. Let's move on. The result of what I'm going to, I'll describe what I'm able to show you. The report that I'm able to print when I click print from my web app, I'm able to specify that the template I want is this report. So what I get is the report with the selections that I've made within the web app. That report is going to show the section of the web app I printed, it's going to show the inset, and then it's going to have on the next page the tabular data that describes what's the aquatic species at risk in Canada within the selection that I've made. I can reproduce that, and I can continue to do that repeatedly without having to print or share the report each time from ArcGIS Pro. I've built that into the custom print service. Distributed collaboration.
Yes. I'd say the data publishing category is pretty broad. But we wanted to talk about distributed collaboration, so completely switching gears here. Collaboration is a feature that was introduced at ArcGIS Enterprise 10.5 and continuously been expanded upon. And essentially what it does is enables you to share content. So this can be feature layers, web maps, applications, insights, items, things like that, from your enterprise deployment to another enterprise deployment. We have implementations of collaborations that have 50 portals that are participating, so it's very scalable. But essentially, it's a way to extend the reach of your data to allow other people to use it. You can also set up collaborations with ArcGIS Online. So if you have maybe enterprise behind the firewall, but you want to be able to share data with the public, but you don't want them accessing enterprise proper, you can share data with ArcGIS Online, and then they will actually hit that layer in online so that it can scale very flexibly. So there's a lot of different use cases. Updates to items are routinely synchronized so that you don't have to script this or export and import, and it actually expands upon that group sharing model. So right now, if I want to share something to Scott, I add it to a group that he's part of. It's the exact same concept for collaboration, where if I want to share something with online, I add it to that specific collaboration group, and it's automatically synchronized with my ArcGIS Online organization. So for 10.7, we have 2 new item types. So you can now copy hosted feature layer views, which was what we reviewed just a few slides ago. So you could set a feature definition and only share the view, which I think is really, really great for maybe secure content. So you want to keep some things within your enterprise, but then share different parts of that data set with ArcGIS Online. And then we're also introducing the ability to copy insights items. So if you create an insights workbook, on the back end, there's going to be a model that has that entire framework for your insights page. And you can share that model so that recipients can add their data to it and entirely recreate that same insights analysis in their own organization. If you need to share other item types, let us know. You can't quite share everything, but we want to continue to add different types as there's demand. There's also the ability to pause and resume synchronizations. So collaboration will automatically synchronize things on the back end for you, but maybe I've shared something to Scott and I'm making edits on it all the time, and I don't want him to receive every single edit that I'm making, because he's going to call me up and be like, Hillary, why is this incorrect? This looks incomplete. So I can actually pause the synchronization so that my data isn't continuously shared to him, but that collaboration still remains intact. So lots of new things for collaboration. We actually have a demo theater tomorrow for 30 minutes. We'll be demoing the Insights workflow and talking a little bit more about tips and tricks for collaboration if you're interested in setting those up.
Speaking of sites, here's what's new in Sites.
Yes, Insights. Not confusing at all. So Sites we introduced at 10.6.1. So it was featured very heavily at UC in the plenary. This is a really great way to tailor the look and feel of your GIS for end users that maybe aren't familiar with portal or GIS content. They don't even know that they're looking at enterprise. So this is a good way to display certain data only to the people who need to be able to see it through a really intuitive website and page, drag and drop builder, or if you are interested in writing custom code, you can really expand this and make some of these websites look really lovely with HTML and CSS. So at 10.7, we're not adding a whole lot, but we are adding some different enhancements that I think will make it easier to deploy these sites. So things like rich text editing, a little bit more streamlined UI for that drag and drop, and being able to choose a focal point for an image so that you're not looking at the entire thing. You can zoom in on certain areas that you want to highlight. So there's a demo theater as well tomorrow if you're interested in sites.
There are a lot of new products coming out, and with Enterprise as the central hub of your GIS, of your web GIS, these are all kind of connected into the Enterprise portal. ArcGIS Excalibur is coming out at 10.7 as a soft launch. It is a complete imagery workflow app that brings for the first time some of the advanced imagery capabilities of desktop imagery GIS into the web GIS experience in a lightweight web app. You are able to do an entire imagery workflow from start to finish. You can search and discover imagery collections. You can select your imagery, manipulate it, do full analysis, side-by-side comparisons of imagery, derive data, graphs, tables from that imagery, and then you're able to assemble professional quality reports and outputs from that imagery. It's a really cool product that has a lot of capabilities to it. ArcGIS Indoors has been talked about a lot recently. It is Esri's indoor application, using indoor positioning systems to be able to map and give very accurate depictions of where you are in a building. It too connects into the portal, and if you have questions about indoors, the indoor team is at the showcase and they love to talk to you. Tracker is a new location tracking app that will be integrated with the portal as well. It has a lot of benefits for workforce, for field workers, and for situational awareness, military intelligence. It is a really powerful location tracking, keeping track of exactly where that track is, and then integrating it into your web maps as well.
Just when you thought it was over, last but not least. So user types are new at Enterprise 10.7. So if you are using ArcGIS Online, you may already be familiar with this because they were released with the December update to Online. One thing that I wanted to mention about user types is if you're using previous versions, so anything prior to 10.7 will still use named users. So still use level 1 and level 2, so it's not retroactive. But if you upgrade or deploy 10.7, you'll be able to take advantage of user types. And I think one of the biggest value propositions is being able to have that intermediate level of user. So formerly we had viewers and we had, level 1s and we had level 2s. Level 2s could do everything. They could administer the site, and level 1s could just view data. So now we have two different users that can actually just go in and edit data, whether they're in the field or they're using web maps. And then all the way up to a GIS professional, which actually includes an ArcGIS Pro license. So there's a lot of flexibility here. Rest assured, if you don't want to use any of these user types and you're upgrading to 10.7, a viewer is exactly the same as a level 1 user, and a creator is exactly the same as a level 2. So don't feel pressured that you need to change anything. If you want to keep everything exactly as is, you can. But if you want to take advantage of the different editors and field workers, then you can do that as well.
A couple of security notes for 10.7. HTTPS communication is going to be enforced by default, and the only TLS, Transport Layer Security Protocol, that's going to be allowed by default is 1.2. This applies to Enterprise. Starting next month, it will also apply to Online. In Enterprise, you're able to change that through the REST API, the administrator directory of both the server and the portal. But we changed the default to improve the default security posture for all ArcGIS organizations. Particularly when you're using online, it's important to validate all of your clients that use your online organization to make sure that they do support TLS 1.2 before that switch on April 16th. If you have any questions, Esri Support has put out a page called support.esri.com/en/TLS that has all the information that you need to figure out how to validate TLS and make sure that you're ready for that change.
And we are also updating the product's lifecycle. So at the end, we decided to hit you with all the good stuff. So we're updating the product lifecycle to have two variants. So right now we offer 6 years of support. We will still do that for what are going to be called long-term support releases. So that will actually start at 10.7, and as well as short-term releases. So short-term support means that you will receive 3 years of support, including 1.5 years of hotfixes, patches, operating system certification, and then 1.5 years of Esri technical support. And at every release, we will convey which is a short-term or long-term support. Most of the dot releases will be long-term support because we know a lot of customers use the dot release. So just keep this in mind when upgrading, and note whether or not it's a short or long-term release. If you have any questions on this, I know we're kind of flying through some of the stuff here at the end. Let us know, visit us at the showcase, talk with your account managers, but we wanted to make sure that you all were aware of some of these announcements and changes. So, okay, I can keep going. So I think that's kind of the tail end of the presentation. We have a lot of resources out there. Scott and I are relatively active on the blog site, and so we'll talk through additional what's new and have screenshots and demos and different videos. The documentation lists exhaustively everything that's new at each release, so definitely check out those resources. And we wanted to do a last screen here because I know that we really inundated you guys with a lot here. We actually tried to cut out as much as possible to keep it pretty concise.
This was the
This is everything,
version.
Yeah, this is everything that we covered. We can share these slides with you if you're interested to go back to your teams and share as well. We really thank you for being here and for being interested in Enterprise and for spending time at Dev Summit this week. So we'll be up here in the front if you have any questions, and thanks for coming and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you.